The most wonderful time of the year has arrived. Don't let anybody fool you into thinking that Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year. No, 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 no. We are at the most glorious 3 weeks of sports that mankind has ever dreamed up. We got men's college basketball tournament. We got women's college basketball tournament. And this weekend, we got the wrestling NCAA tournament. It's pure and utter joy. It's nonstop sports for entire days at a time. It's beautiful. And we're here to talk about all of it, and particularly Iowa State's role in it. This is the Cornfield Sports Pod bonus episode, March Madness edition. On the mics with me, I've got Blake and our producer, Vinny.
What's going on?
What's up?
You missed the NIT.
Yeah, it's called the Not Important Tournament, so it's not important to talk about on the pod.
Not invited to the tournament.
Yeah, not invited.
Not invited tournament.
Not invited tournament is what I would call it.
Not invited tournament, not important tournament, not in tournament, whatever you want to call it. It's not important because it's the not important tournament. Not important enough for this show anyway. Let's talk about the real stuff. In order to get to or at least preceding the NCAA tournaments, we've got the conference tournaments, and I think since we didn't get to talk about this on Friday with you being in New York and Blake and myself being in Kansas City, we've got some talking to do about the Big 12 tournaments.
Oh man. So Matt was able to witness the Big 12 tournament, at least a couple games in there.
Yes, I was down in Kansas City for the semifinals and the finals. Absolutely glorious wins for Iowa State. But before I got down there, we got to talk about that quarterfinal night on Thursday. Dismantling K-State 76-57. Chip on the shoulder game. Created a bit of an interesting storyline after the regular season closing loss to K-State at Bramlage Coliseum.
Just dismantling K-State and Jerome Tang as well.
Well, I mean, we beat them by 19, so yeah, absolute dismantling.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Jerome Tang just decided to become a walking meme during that game by taking a manager's mop and, mopping the floor instead of coaching.
Like literally everyone was confused with that, and like everyone was making like memes out of it.
Oh,
like,
it's absolutely a meme.
Memes out of it is like, oh, Jerome Tang's future profession. It's like I saw that like everywhere on Twitter that night.
Well, if he keeps going to the NIT, he's not going to last much longer as a Power 5 basketball coach.
Oh,
so,
yeah, that night I couldn't really watch a whole lot because I was in the Madison Square Garden with the Big East tournaments. I got to see Creighton and Providence and Marquette versus Villanova. So
wow.
that's what I was doing that night. I did see a little bit of our game that was going on.
Dude, to be in the Garden too is crazy. Just to go to a game there, like that would just be crazy.
And I was keeping tabs on our game from the CHI Health Center in Omaha because I was at the Omaha Supernovas game. So
we were just everywhere that night.
We were everywhere. Living it up in big arenas was great.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all were, and I was just stuck at home watching it on TV.
Well, someone had to be.
Yeah, and who else but the producer?
No, you had a great time at Comic-Con.
I did. That's a story for another time. We're here to talk about sports.
Story for another time. But yeah, no, that K-State game storyline in and of itself, the coaching antics, the Tang mopping. The real storyline though was the presser after the game because,
Dude,
this Kansas State Iowa State rivalry went from, we're talking heat levels here, right? It went from being like a matchstick to like a charcoal grill when K-State accused us of all of the cheating stuff. Was it last month, 2 months ago, whatever it was?
Had
now
to have been 2 months ago. I have to
it feels like it's been a while ago.
It was back in January.
Okay, so yeah, 2 months ago. So that was like going from a matchstick to a charcoal grill. Well, in the presser after the Big 12 quarterfinal, well, now you've poured more gasoline on it, and we've gone from a charcoal grill to a forest fire.
That's accurate representation.
Yeah, it is.
Yep.
It's a heated rivalry now, right? You got to use, something warm, right? That's an accurate metaphor. But yeah, no, Tang saying that Taman Lipsey is the number one flopper in the league. Yeah, I'm going to contend right back at you, Jerome Tang. You're the number one gaslighter in the league.
Mike, drop.
Yeah,
that's all I have to say to you. Anyway.
Now something else. I can't remember what game it was. I don't know if it was Baylor or Houston. That Tamin Lipsey got hit in the throat.
That was Houston.
That was Houston. You want to call that?
I think that was Houston.
Okay, you want to call that biggest flopper in the league? Then try getting hit in the throat, like getting an arm in your throat.
Bro, you get hit in the throat. It takes a while for you to breathe.
I think that was the Houston game. I don't know. I was sitting in the same seat for the Houston and the Baylor game, so they blended together a little bit. But
it blends together for me too. And I'm the one watching it on TV.
Yeah. But yeah, the Baylor game, that one had a much different vibe than the K-State game one, because and this is coming from my experience talking to some Baylor fans after the game, is that it almost served as a win-win. That it actually losing this game actually might have benefited Baylor, because the placement that they got from the selection committee in the NCAA tournament actually was a fairly clean path. It's certainly cleaner than the one Iowa State got in that East bracket, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But Baylor also didn't have a ton to gain by winning that game. They weren't going to get to a 2 seed by winning that game. They were listed as the third to last or the last 3 seed by most estimates, and that it was probably going to stay there. So yeah, they lost. They got they won their quarterfinal. They locked their 3 seed, and they weren't gonna claim a 2 seed by beating us. They would have pushed somebody else into a 2 seed more than likely by beating us. So they go home. They get an extra day of rest. They get an extra day of practice. They get an extra day of preparation. So they get time to lock in and be ready to go. And as for us, it completely solidified our case as a 2 seed to not be dropped all the way down to a 3. And as results from other conferences began to stream in, it started to give us, a little bit of hope at potentially reaching a 1 seed. And we have some words for the selection committee when we get to that. Houston game here. This one was a game of historic proportions.
Probably the greatest Iowa State basketball game I've ever seen.
Yep, I can attest to that.
This was some of the best college basketball in general I have ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
Held AP-ranked number 1 Houston to 41 points. The lowest an AP number 1 ranked team has been held since I believe it was 1967, before the shot clock era. The previous the record is also an Iowa State record when we held Wilt Chamberlain, Kansas, to, I believe, it was 39 points. And that's pre-shot clock, pre-three-pointer. So the defensive showing that Iowa State just put out on Saturday is world-class defense.
We raced to number 1 defense in what, KenPom?
Yes, number 1 defense in KenPom. Whereas we were number 2 before that, and Houston was number 1.
Yeah.
But the defense, absolutely crazy. The margin of victory, 28 points against an AP number 1. That is one of the largest, if not the largest ever. But can we talk for a second? 69 points against Houston is no mean feat either.
No, it's not.
I mean, Houston's been the flashiest defense. It's been the most efficient defense for the entire year up until Saturday when we passed them. So, putting up 69 points against Houston, our offense was humming. Our defense was humming. And that was the epitome of what was already a great week of basketball for us. Coming off of that initial K-State loss to end the regular season at Bramlage Coliseum, coming into the T-Mobile Center and just absolutely dismantling the 3 teams that have beat us most recently.
Yeah, every team that we faced in there.
It's so crazy, too, because I'm looking at the stats for Houston. Their points per game is 56. So they showed up. Iowa State did.
You'd say we topped that by 13 points.
Exactly. We came to play and we did, which our boys did it. That's all I can say.
But it also creates another interesting data point for Iowa State. Every single team that beat us in conference play, we have beaten more recently. Oklahoma was the first one to do it. They beat us down in Oklahoma. We beat them in Ames. Same thing with BYU. And then Baylor, Houston, and Kansas State, they all beat us during the regular season in our later matchups with them, or in the case of Baylor, our only regular season matchup with them. And then we beat them at the T-Mobile Center in the Big 12 tournament. We have avenged losses against every single team that we have lost to since the November 26th loss against Texas A&M. Find me another team who's done that, NCAA selection committee.
You can't.
It's not out there. That's a lot of revenge wins, but to do it we did it in dominating fashion too. This is a team that has absolutely been at the top of their game for a while. This is the team that when they get a chip on their shoulder, they go out, they show out, and they beat the tar out of their opponents. We very effectively did that down at the T-Mobile Center. And, the selection committee, they gave us a 2 seed in the East, but the 8th true seed, the very last 2 seed, when we were talking about, and the general population, the media, talking about Iowa State potentially being a 1 seed, Jerry Palm had us as a 1 seed in the CBS bracketology, and the selection committee said, no, not only are you not even in contention for that, you barely scraped together a 2 seed. They said we were the worst 2 seed behind North Carolina, who's the last 1 seed, Arizona, Tennessee, and Marquette. That's an insult to this team, and that should put another chip on their shoulder. That needs to be massive, massive motivation going into the dance here.
So how many of these teams ahead of us won their conference championship?
In the AP, in the true seeding?
In the true seed.
So UConn did. They're number 1.
Mm-hmm. That's a lock.
Houston is number 2. They did not. Purdue is number 3. They did not. North Carolina is number 4. They did not. Arizona, I believe, is number 5. They did not. Tennessee did not. Marquette did not. We are the next one in. That's impressive. I hadn't even realized that, but that's impressive in its own right. That's crazy.
And considering how much we beat the number 1 team in the country by.
Yeah, 28-point margin. That's historic. That's going down in the history books. That's the kind of game that should show up in the College Basketball Hall of Fame right next door to the T-Mobile Center in about a year or two with, a panoramic picture of the crowd there or something like that. Or maybe a picture of the Iowa State fans at Power and Light District chugging $15 beers.
Are you trying to say you won in that Hall of Fame?
Yes.
He'd get it right in. Are you kidding me?
Yep. Yeah, it's, I'd just be like some speck in the crowd, but it'd be cool.
Definitely.
I'd be able to make the claim, would I not?
No, you definitely would. There's no question about that. You definitely would.
Not only could I absolutely would.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's could. You absolutely, definitely.
Oh, I would milk it for all it's worth.
Yeah, we know that's pretty true for you, too.
Yep.
Just Iowa State's best ball knower in the Hall of Fame.
Yep. Anyway, but let's talk about some of these other side-by-side comparisons with the teams that the selection committee put ahead of us. Now, the first 3 1 seeds, there's no questions. They had the best records. They all were regular season conference champions. They looked dominant throughout the entire year. UConn, Purdue, Houston, 1 seeds, no question. North Carolina. Let's have a conversation here. We had a better strength of schedule. We had a better strength of record. We're better in KenPom. We're better in the net. We are better. We have more quad 1, 2. We have the same quad 1 and 2 record, but we have more quad 1 wins and less quad 2 losses, which means our losses are not as bad and our wins are better. Our Q3-4 games are also the same record, and considering there's no losses in there, generally irrelevant. So, yeah, you tell me who has the better resume. The AP poll and the coaches poll and the computers pretty much all are in agreement that Iowa State should be the 4th ranked team in the country. That would translate to the 4 true seed, the last 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. So that's not the last 2 seed, the last 1 seed. The selection committee openly disrespected the Iowa State Cyclones.
And they also very much regarded the non-con strength of schedule.
Yes, the non-con strength of schedule as opposed to the overall strength of schedule. In order to justify putting North Carolina ahead of Iowa State, they actively chose to ignore half of the season. That's how they made their justification. Because if you take the second half of the season into account, what you discover is that North Carolina played in what is probably the weakest ACC we have seen in a very long time, whereas Iowa State ran an absolute gauntlet in the Big 12, which is definitely the best Big 12 we've ever seen, and arguably one of the best college basketball conferences we've seen, period. It's hard to argue a conference that has been better. It is just absolutely dominant.
And then they chose to ignore it, just like you said.
Yep. And the thing is, drawing a line at the non-con strength of schedule is extremely arbitrary. Why should North Carolina's harder games be given special treatment because those harder games happen to not be in the same league as them? Why are we not treating Iowa State's win over Houston the same as we're treating home win against Houston, the same as North Carolina's home win against Tennessee? Those 2 games should be given equivalence, but they're not. UNC was favored because the Tennessee game was in their non-conference, while the Houston game against Iowa State is in league play. Therefore, it was ignored by the NCSOS. It's an arbitrary line. A good team is a good team. A bad team is a bad team. It doesn't matter whether or not they're in your league, and you shouldn't dismiss it because they're in your league. So that's extremely poor choice by the committee. And, we're talking and I don't want to suggest that there's anything nefarious going on, but when the computers and the reporters and the coaches all have Iowa State pretty much as a consensus 4, and a bunch of guys in suits in a closed-off room, that's already, a alarming description to start.
But accurate.
It's accurate, but it's alarming. And they decide against the grain that you're an 8 seed with no detailed explanation as to why. I'm not going to suggest that there's anything nefarious at play, but maybe it would at least be a good idea to have the deliberations open to observers.
They just don't want to be transparent.
No. Transparency is a good thing. And it doesn't need to be like you have them in the room, where they can influence the decision and say something like that. Put it all on camera and live stream the deliberations. That way it's, open for reporters to see. It's open for the general public to comment on. But then they don't have to actually be in the room. And the thing is, the people in the room don't have to see what everybody else is commenting on it. But transparency gives accountability. And then you also at least have the luxury, if you're on the outside looking in, of knowing why they're thinking what they are. So you can at least, they can at least justify what they're saying instead of basing it by one arbitrary data point. Because NCSOS is arbitrary, especially at the end of the year. At the start in January, NCSOS, if you're talking about making your AP rankings, sure, that maybe that's worth considering before you really have league play to work with. At the end of the season, NCSOS is only half of it. It's half of the picture. completely arbitrary. But enough of that rant. We've got some other teams to compare Iowa State to on that 2 seed line because, again, chip on the shoulder. This needs to be motivation for the Cyclones here. Let's look at the Q1, Q2 records here. 8-3 Q1, 7-4 Q2. I want you to tell me which one of these sounds the best after all is said and done. 8-7 Q1, 5-1 Q2. 9-8 Q1, 6-1 Q2, or 10-6 Q1, 6-1 Q2. Which one of those 4 sounds the best?
You said it in a way that was like, oh man,
because I think it's pretty darn obvious.
Yeah,
it's obviously the 10-6, 6-1 Q1, Q2 record because it's got the most good wins and the least of the worst losses, and all things compared. So it's got the least losses in there total, but also the losses that are in there are the highest quality losses that you can have.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not they're the least damaging losses, and they're the most building wins. This is an absolutely phenomenal team, and it's also worth noting that 8-3 Q1, 7-4 Q2, the one that has the most Q2 losses, also has one quad 3 loss.
Bad.
That one quad 3 loss, your Arizona Wildcats.
Oof.
And they're ranked how many spots?
They're the 5th or 6th true seed. I don't remember which one's first between Arizona and Tennessee. Marquette's the 7th, Iowa State's the 8th. But Marquette 8 Q1 losses. They've got the same Q2 record as Iowa State, 6-1. Marquette's 9-8 in Q1 as opposed to 10-6 for Iowa State. So Iowa State unequivocally better in the Q1, equivalent in Q2. So Iowa State should obviously jump Marquette. 10-6 as opposed to 8-7 in the Q1 for Tennessee, and one more Q2 win than Tennessee. We should easily be above them. And Arizona's got the worst record among them. Arizona, in my opinion, doesn't even have any business being a 2 seed. In my opinion, they should be a 3. But that's where we're at. And the only other teams with as many Q1s as Iowa State are the 3 consensus 1 seeds. UConn, Houston, and Purdue all have more quad 1 wins than Iowa State does. They're the only teams with but those 4 teams, us, and then the 3 consensus 1 seeds, are the only 4 teams in the country with double-digit Q1 wins. That's it.
Wow.
So that's the mark of a phenomenal team. And the committee disrespected that.
They done screwed up. Done screwed up.
It's terrible.
But that's the point that I keep reiterating, though. Chip on your shoulder, Iowa State. Like, this needs to be your bulletin board material. Be looking at that every day that you go into practice. Have that posted in your locker room. Have that posted in your locker room when you're at your first weekend games in Omaha. Look at that. Let that be motivation. Prove this committee wrong, because they are wrong. Now show it to them. Do better than all of these other 2 seeds. Do better than North Carolina, who I think is an absolute fraud of a 1 seed and should probably be the last 2 seed. Because I think Tennessee and Marquette are both better than North Carolina as well.
Mm-hmm.
But let's prove them wrong. Let's go through this absolute gauntlet of an East bracket that we've got here.
And it's really stood out as such a gauntlet. I mean, like everywhere I see on ESPN, like every time I watch, like they're just hyping up how UConn was like snubbed in the East region.
Well, everybody that was in the East was snubbed. UConn has every reason to be mad about it. So does Illinois and Auburn and BYU, because all of these teams should be competitive, and only one of them can make it out. And then if there's a Cinderella team that pops out of the East, now I think the East bracket's the least likely for that, just because of how densely talented the bracket is. But it means all of the good teams in the East got hurt. I mean, Auburn. You look at Auburn, for example. the Associated Press, that's your reporters, the ones that are watching your games, your coaches, and the net all have Auburn as a 2 seed, not a 4. That's how insane that is. And
see, I was surprised too that Auburn got a 4.
yeah, I thought that was crazy. I thought bare minimum they've got to be at least the second 3 seed. I didn't think they could be any higher than that because I mean they've been a phenomenal team this year, and the clinics that they have put on against some of the teams that they have played, talented teams. I mean they have absolutely beat the tar out of Alabama and South Carolina, and South Carolina's only got 6 losses on the year, 6 maybe 7 losses on the year.
Mm-hmm.
South Carolina's got a good team. Now, South Carolina played a fairly weak record, but, I mean, they still played in the SEC, which is the second-best basketball conference this year. So that's where we're at here.
South Carolina only lost 8 games.
8 games. Okay. And that's got to include their conference tournament. So, but, I mean, they beat the tar out of South Carolina twice. I think the combined margin of victory across both games was like 68 points or something like that. They beat them by like 30 and 40. It was wild. They beat up on Alabama. They steamrolled through the SEC tournament. Auburn's got a fantastic team. Bruce Pearl comes in clutch in March. We all remember it was the 2019 Final Four run. Illinois' got a good team. Now the Big Ten I think is a little bit overrated. We'll see how well they actually do, and I'll talk about what I've got Illinois' situation as a little bit later. BYU, they're an interesting case because BYU cannot play on Sundays because of the religious rules. So BYU was actually by true seeds supposed to be a 5 seed. But had to get relegated to a 6 seed because of those Sunday playing rules. They had to move them to a different location. And so BYU ended up playing in Omaha, and they will have a Thursday game and then presumably a Saturday game, assuming BYU beats their first-round opponent. But when talking about the disparity here between the brackets, if you sum together the KenPom rankings of the top 4 seeds in each bracket, the other 3 brackets, not the East, 41, 42, 43. Very consistent. That's what you want. You want consistent numbers there. The East, 20. The East is a much more difficult bracket to steamroll through. Now, there is a bright side of this. And the bright side is that the most difficult opponents can pare themselves down before ISU has to worry about them. And on the top side of the bracket, assuming Iowa State makes it to the Elite Eight, that's going to have to happen because you can't have both Auburn and UConn make it to the Elite Eight. Mm-hmm. Someone's got to lose in there. So it's a tough break for UConn and Auburn and Illinois and BYU and us, considering there's a lot of talented teams here that if you spread them out amongst the brackets, you might end up with multiple of them in the Final Four. But that is just not going to be the case right now. Let's talk women's ball briefly. Big 12 tournament, a couple ugly games, one of which we won against Baylor. Turnovers kept Baylor in that game. We did really bad on the turnover margins, 22-8, saved by a late game run. Oklahoma game was a complete opposite story.
That was like one of the most dominant women's games I've ever seen.
Yeah, the score is disparate. 85-68, that's a disparate score. It still doesn't illustrate just how dominant we were in that game. We outshot them, we out-rebounded them, we out-turnovered them, forced turnovers. Pretty much everything in that game, Iowa State was running the show. Audie Crooks had herself an absolute field day in that game.
We did everything right to the fullest extent, basically.
For the most part, yes. Oklahoma did still score 68 points, so the defense could have had some improvement.
But to get 85 points just in
right,
general
it is a
huge.
faster moving game.
Oh, yeah.
And Kelsey Jones gets the last laugh in the sibling rivalry.
Yeah, and especially
So,
in a
'cause
women's
will
game
be,
too.
That will be the last time that Kelsey and Aubrey go against each other, to the best of my knowledge.
That's right. But just in a women's game, 85 points. I even said that in like just a college game in general is crazy to think about.
Well, the women's game has gotten a lot faster though.
It has. Yeah, I'll give it that.
80, getting up into the 80s is a lot more frequent than it was, say, 5-6 years ago.
Because I remember, back then, like most like women's games were just like in the 50s. Like it wasn't like they weren't like
that used to be a thing, but it's gotten much higher recently as the pace of the game has picked up. 3-point shooting is something that's picked up a lot, and then the in and out offense to the post is something that's gotten very common in women's basketball. We see that a lot with Iowa State. It's either a post move from Crooks or a 3-pointer, and it's been effective, and a lot of other teams are using it too because it works. I mean, we used it last year with Stephanie Suarez before she had her injury, and it was effective with Suarez as well. Iowa's been doing this for a while with Megan Gustafson and then Monica Sonano and now Hannah Stalke.
AKA the team that should not be named, or the team out east.
Crap, you got me on this.
You're going to have to bleep, unfortunately.
Yep. Oh, well. Dang it, that's twice I've done that 2 times in a row now, because the last time that someone did that on this show, it was me too. Darn it, I'm not. Anyway, let's move on to the Texas game here. We lost this one 53-70. This was a very very physical game. I was talking to one of our former Cyclone players about this game afterwards, and we were both in agreement. Yeah, we looked good during the tournament, probably improved our seed line. Thank goodness we got out of this game without any injuries, because Texas didn't. Texas's Taylor Jones left the game with an injury, but this is something that I was talking about as the game went on, and seeing just how physical it was and how physical the officials were allowing it to be. And it wasn't like it was only in one direction either. It was both directions, absolutely. So it was even, but it was a very physical game. And I remember distinctly thinking after that game, I was like, thank goodness that there were not more injuries than there actually were in that game, because I mean, you don't always necessarily spot everything that happens to the other team, just because you're being a little bit blind to it. But like at various points, I saw Emily get pushed all the way off the court at one point and kicked at another point in the game. Neither of those were called.
Did you just say kicked?
Kicked, yes.
As in like
foot.
So
Yes.
What?
Yeah, so it was early in the second half. Emily Ryan was diving for a loose ball on the ground and got kicked by a Texas player. I didn't see which player it was, but
just straight up kicked.
No, I don't think it was an intentional
kick. Well, no,
kick.
probably not intentional, but
I don't think it was an intentional kick.
Still,
but nonetheless, a kick's a kick.
But regardless,
a kick's a kick, and it's got to be called.
Officiating in basketball,
but that happened, and there was a couple times that there was a couple pretty egregious rebounding fouls that Kelsey Jones got shoved all the way to the ground on, hit the ground pretty hard, it looked like, and neither of those were called either. So, but I mean, seeing things like that, it just makes you wonder. And the same thing happened to Addie Brown at least once that I saw. But that just makes you thankful at the end, because this game didn't really hurt us in any meaningful fashion. Losing the game in any meaningful fashion. So there wasn't a whole lot to worry about in terms of that. But you get out of this and, you worry about, okay, what condition are our players in after the game? Because we saw with Texas, Taylor Jones was clearly injured. And the win ended up helping Texas. It got them that last 1 seed.
I didn't see what injury did she have? Was it just like a leg injury?
I think it was either ankle or knee.
Either way, one of those hurts like a mother.
Yeah. It was not good because she was not. It looked like she was not putting weight. If I remember correctly, she was not putting weight on it as she left the court. So hopefully that changes. And because we don't need injured players. Anyway, going into the NCAA tournament here, We were allotted a 7 seed in the Portland 4 region. A 7 seed was a little bit better than I was expecting. I was thinking 8 or 9 line. So I'll take it. But that does give us the disadvantage of having to travel all the way out to the West Coast because Stanford will be hosting the first weekend for us out in the Portland 4 region. We're going to play Maryland. Maryland's 1-8 versus top 25 teams. Both of them score well and don't defend great. So go into this one expecting a high-scoring game. And then if we win versus Maryland, we likely play Stanford, and that's like running into a concrete wall. So
Yep.
Stanford's got a very, very talented team.
Mm-hmm.
That they do.
If we get to talking about women's brackets in a little bit, I might say how far I have them. We'll see how much time we've got. Well, let's talk wrestling real quick before we get to breaking down the men's bracket at large here. Big 12 tournament. Iowa State's the team champions for the first time since 2009. That's a good place to be.
That's what
Very
we call a dub city.
Yes. It's a good week to be in. It's a great week. Not just good. It's a great week to be an Iowa State athletics fan with wrestling and with men's basketball being conference champions and women's basketball being runner-up. It's a good time to be a Cyclone right now.
Absolutely.
But yeah, team champs for the first time since 2009. Anthony Echemendia and Younger Bastida both claiming individual Big 12 titles. We had 3 other runner-ups. That would be Evan Frost, Cody Chittum, and David Carr. Bastida defeated the previously undefeated Wyatt Hendrickson, who was consensus ranked second from Air Force. He's a very good wrestler, and the way things are seeded for the tournament here beginning on Thursday, we'll likely have Bastida and Hendrickson wrestling each other again in the semifinals. So that's going to be a big one. 8 of our wrestlers got automatic bids. Will Feldkamp and Julian Broderson were the exceptions there, and Feldkamp was allotted an at-large bid for 9 total NCAA qualifiers. As far as nationals go, 5 Cyclones with top 8 seeds. These are the ones that are projected to be All-Americans. Your 8th seed, Evan Frost, 5 seed, Anthony Echemendia, 8 seed, Casey Swiderski, and 4 seed, David Carr, as well as 2nd seeded, Younger Bastida. Now, one of the things that we were all looking forward to before the brackets came out here, we were hoping that we were going to get a chance at a Carr versus O'Toole rematch in the finals again. It would have made a fantastic storyline, but that is not what the seeds gave us. The seeds gave us a 4th seed, David Carr, which means if he wrestles O'Toole, it will be in the semifinal. If he wrestles O'Toole in the winner's bracket, it will be in the semifinal. Mitchell Messenbrink from Penn State, who is undefeated, was given the 2 seed, and you go undefeated in the Big Ten. That's an impressive task. Julian Ramirez from Cornell was given the 3 seed. Now, he did defeat David Carr once earlier this year, but the second time they had the opportunity to wrestle each other, which I believe was collegiate duels, Julian Ramirez ducked him, so they did not get a chance to wrestle each other again, and Carr did not get a chance to get Ramirez back for that. So that's how that shook out. That's why David is the 4th seed. I'm of the opinion that, if you're gonna duck a tough opponent and when it comes to NCAA seeding, you should be penalized for it. Because I think in terms of seeding anyway, that doing something like that should be treated kind of like a forfeit. Basically because you're scared to wrestle him. So that's the way I look at that. And then, as I mentioned, Younger Bastida will almost certainly have to go through Wyatt Hendrickson again in the semifinal in order to get to the final. I don't anticipate any upsets coming against the top 4 seeds in heavyweight. I would think the top semifinal is going to be Kirkvliet versus Schultz, and the bottom one will be Bastida Hendrickson. I see no reason to think it's going to be anything else. Those 4 just absolutely dominate heavyweight. And the only exception to that, I think maybe Zach Elam beats Colton Schultz. I see no reason to believe the top 3 seeds don't make semifinals because they are a league of their own. And I really want to see Younger wrestle Greg Kirkfleet in the finals. That would be a very, very entertaining bout.
It would be. I'd like to watch that.
What seed is Greg?
He's the 1 seed. But that's what we got for wrestling. So let's get to the rest of the men's basketball bracket here.
Let's do it.
Is there any particular games here that y'all wanna talk about? Paths to the Final Four, anything like that? Anything standing out to y'all?
In the FAU and Northwestern game, I'm taking Northwestern.
Well, I mean, I have FAU for that one just because I think Northwestern is the Big Ten as a whole is kind of a fraud. I think they put 2 frauds against each other in that game, and I had to pick one. So I picked FAU because the 8 seed historically wins slightly more often than the 9 seed, and I that's about as much justification as I can give to either team for that game.
This is true. This is very true.
Because to be honest, I don't think either one of them is that good. And I also said not a while, but I said before the brackets are even out that I was only going to have 2 Big Ten teams moving on from the first round, and Northwestern was not going to be one of them. Purdue was going to be one of them. They're not going to lose to a 16 seed twice in a row.
No,
that's not going to happen. And then I had said that the other one was either going to be Illinois or Nebraska.
Well, I have Purdue making it to the championship against North Carolina.
That's absurd. That's absurd because Purdue always blows it.
And
North Carolina is overrated.
North Carolina has no business.
North Carolina, they got an easy path.
Do you think UConn is going to take it?
No. I have Houston as my natty. Houston's my national champion.
Houston?
They got like 5 NBA players on that roster.
And Iowa State beat that.
Yeah, so you gave Houston the biggest chip on their shoulder of any other team in this bracket, and they have more talent than anybody else except maybe Kentucky.
I don't know, because I have Purdue beating Houston.
Yeah, I do not.
No.
I don't think Purdue is getting out of the second round. Purdue does not even make it to the second weekend.
It always amazes me when people get like the perfect bracket, and I'm just like, how?
Yeah, no one's getting a perfect bracket. The longest anyone's ever gone in a row is 49 games.
Jeez.
That was in 2019. And then it fell apart in the Sweet 16 for him. I have Purdue losing to Utah State in the second round. Utah State is a team that I think right now is criminally underrated. I think the Mountain West is an interesting story because I think the Aztecs are overrated and everybody else in the tournament is underrated.
Mm-hmm.
And then Boise's about where they should be.
Yeah.
But Utah State I have making a run all the way to the Elite Eight. Because I have them as it stands right now. I've got Utah State beating TCU. That's the game that I'm the most questionable about with Utah State here is the game against TCU because Purdue just doesn't live up to the big moment. So I got Utah State beating Purdue. In the Sweet 16 right now, I've got Utah State beating Kansas. That could be subject to change depending on Kansas' injury report. If it's announced before game time that Dickinson and McCullough are not playing, then I'll have Kansas losing to Samford the first round. And then that'll create a really easy path for Utah State because I have McNeese beating Gonzaga because Gonzaga is not it this year. They fared much below their standard in a very weak conference, and they played nobodies all year and still ended up with, 7 losses? 7 losses, 2 losses in the WCC. I think both were to St. Mary's. But 7 losses for Gonzaga is a lot. I'm not a believer in Gonzaga. It's a 5-12, so, those 5-12 upsets happen. So yeah, McNeese Kansas is my round of 32 game right now, and then McNeese just I don't think is a team that can win 2 games in a row. They're not a strong enough team. But yeah, Utah State to the Elite Eight is an interesting one. My other Cinderella team that I want to look at here, and this is not a popular pick, College of Charleston. I've got the College of Charleston going to the Sweet 16 before they lose to North Carolina.
Beating Alabama.
I've got them beating Bama. Some of that is just because I don't want Bama to win that. I'm not a Bama fan.
I'm sorry, literally, but the College of Charleston.
Yes.
I'm admitted. Seed beating the number 4 seed Alabama.
It happens.
It happens, yeah.
Okay, it happens, but like, come on, Alabama has everything. The only thing the College of Charleston has going for them is their opponent's points per game.
Okay, and upsets happen. It's called an upset.
I know upsets happen, but like, come on, you got to be a little realistic.
I am being realistic. Upsets happen.
You could have picked probably going against Purdue. That would have made a little bit more sense because Purdue, like you say,
I have Purdue getting upset by Utah State.
See, that makes more sense. But the College of Charleston beating Bama.
There's always weird ones, though, that are not explainable by the metrics. They're not explainable by expertise. They just happen.
We all know, like, Charleston, like, one.
But Bama's strength of schedule
Furman
is first.
beating Virginia last year.
Okay.
14-3. You want to go back farther into a very painful piece of Iowa State history when we lost to UAB? It happens.
I know it happens. I know it does.
It happens fairly often. It doesn't sound like it should, but it does. And so College of Charleston to the Sweet 16 I've got because and I've got Grand Canyon St. Mary's, that's the 5-12 that's right next to it. That's a very popular 5-12 pick, which gives St. Mary's a chip on their shoulder. That's the reason I have St. Mary's picked. They have a chip on their shoulder going into that game. They're not going to get 5-12. Now, after going out of that, they're going to think they're out of the woods against a 13 seed. And St. Mary's, small school, WCC, and a weaker WCC than normal because Gonzaga sucks. So St. Mary's, by default, is also less proven. And so if St. Mary's sleeps on Charleston, which I think they will, give me Charleston to the Sweet 16, where they will eventually lose to North Carolina. And North Carolina is a team that I wanted to, just after the whole seeding debacle, I wanted to have North Carolina lose in this bracket sooner than I actually did. Yeah. I've got North Carolina making it all the way to the Elite Eight, and I'm very confident that North Carolina is not a top 14, therefore I did not put them in my Final Four. I have North Carolina losing to Baylor. But this is going to be an interesting one for the top seeds here because I'm curious, how many 1 seeds do you guys have in your Final Four?
None.
Benny, do you have all of them in your Final Four?
I might.
Oh, no.
I made this bracket at 9 a.m. on very little sleep. I just picked and choose.
Well, yeah, that's how you make a bracket.
I know, but I wasn't thinking straight when I decided to pick.
Nobody thinks straight when they're making a bracket. That's why no one's ever gotten a perfect one.
Well, I have North Carolina winning it. That's all I'll say. And my tiebreaker to combined score 156.
I got Iowa State and Houston in the final with a tiebreaker of 129.
Of course you do. Of course Iowa State. Why not?
Because I want this storyline.
You want the storyline.
Can you imagine, though, what it would be like if Iowa State had the perfect run and, can you imagine what it would be like up here?
It would be amazing, but the other thing, there's a little bit of justification that I have going with Iowa State and Houston in the final, and I've got Houston winning it for this same reason.
Of course.
Chip on their shoulder.
Chip on the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
Chip on the shoulder is one of the most massive influences in March Madness. There are very few influences that are actually bigger. Actual raw talent, helps. Good coaching helps. Game strategy helps. But that chip on the shoulder, that motivation, that gets you in places where your different strategies matter. Because if you don't have the motivation, congratulations, you're going to get blown out by 30 in the second round. You're not going to get anywhere. And that's if you make it that far. Right. No, you have motivation. You have a chip on your shoulder. That'll move you. That'll get you places. And there are no two teams right now in the tournament that have bigger chips on their shoulder than Iowa State and Houston. Houston, after getting absolutely dismantled in the Big 12 tournament and losing that number 1 overall seed as a result, they obviously have something to prove.
Yeah.
And then Iowa State, after getting snubbed out of a 1 seed, and then not only getting snubbed out of a 1 seed, because that's one thing. To lose the 1 seed by, maybe 1 or 2 spots, that's one thing. That's discrepancies in how people look at it. But to say that they were the last 2 seed that going through the Big 12 conference and steamrolling everybody, that's what got them in the door of the 2 seed. That's the committee saying you were a 3 before that. That's disrespect. So that gives a pretty big chip on the shoulder of Iowa State too. And I don't think there's any teams not in the conference. I don't think there's any teams in the country that have bigger chips on their shoulder than Houston and Iowa State right now. And I think that's going to carry them all the way.
I'll say I at least have Iowa State to the Final Four.
The other 2 teams in my Final Four are Baylor and Creighton. And that's more.
I do have Creighton in the Final Four.
That's more or less a result of the path that they've been given.
I have Iowa State making it to the 6. Elite. What is it? Elite
8.
Elite 8.
What's the 6th one?
Sweet 16.
Sweet 16.
Oh, never mind. It's Elite. I have to make it to Elite 8, and then they lose to UConn.
Yeah. I've got UConn getting knocked out by Auburn.
UConn getting knocked out.
I do have that same one.
I have.
Do we both
I have San Diego.
Do we both have Iowa State versus Auburn?
We do both have Iowa State versus Auburn. And that UConn Auburn one that's a tricky one to predict.
It is.
Because generally speaking, UConn is a better team. You look at their records, you look at their strength of record, all of that. Quad 1 wins, all of that. UConn is generally a better team. Stylistically, that matters. Stylistically makes a difference, though. And if I was going to make a list of teams that I thought were well-equipped to beat UConn, Auburn would be at the top, if not very close to the top, if not at the top of that list.
We are about to see an evil Bruce Pearl.
But yeah, no, if I'm making a list of teams if I was going to choose a list of teams that I thought had the best chances at beating UConn, I think I have to put Creighton at the top of that list because they actually did it fairly recently.
Yes, at home, and it was dominant.
Yes. Houston, just because of raw talent. And then probably Auburn and Kentucky. Kentucky's a dangerous team, too. We need to talk about Kentucky for a second.
Oh, yeah.
Because Kentucky has a ton of raw talent. I mean, they're fairly young, but they've got a ton of raw talent. They've shown that they can put an absolute clinic on against other top-tier teams. They completely dismantled Auburn earlier this year. But they've just been a little bit inconsistent. But if I'm any team at all in this tournament, Kentucky is a team that I do not want to run into. Because they can turn it on like a light switch and then goodbye. You've lost. Kentucky is a very dangerous team, and I've got Kentucky making a run all the way to the Elite 8 before they finally lose to Houston. I've got Kentucky beating Marquette as a result of that.
I've honestly got Marquette beating Kentucky. And then Houston losing to Marquette, and then Marquette makes a run to the Final Four.
I've got
Marquette's an interesting one because it's going to depend on how healthy Tyler Kolek is. We know he's going to be ready to go. We know Kolek is going to be playing, but is he at the top of his game or not? So that's the biggest determining factor, and we won't really be able to see that until after the brackets lock.
I've got Kentucky making it to the Elite 8 against Houston.
That's yep. We're looking at the same thing here. I was a little tempted to have James Madison in the Sweet 16 against Houston, but I don't. I do have Duke.
Yeah, I have Duke making it.
Duke, I can't see Duke making it any farther than the Sweet 16. The Duke, I think, is a top 16 team, but they're not better than that.
I've got Duke losing to James Madison, and then James Madison faces Houston, and then Houston
beats JMU. So you've got James Madison as a Sweet 16, or not?
Yes.
Yes, as a Sweet 16, but as a Cinderella.
Yes.
Because
like I've heard so much about how dominant James Madison is.
Any other big storyline? Oh, we have to talk about the our quadrant of the bracket here. Iowa State against South Dakota. Was this former
T.J. Otzelberger?
Yeah, Otz used to coach there.
Yeah,
and then assuming we win that game, we run into either Washington State or Drake. I have Drake picked to win that game because they will have home court advantage.
They will
in Omaha. One, because Drake, like the Drake diehards will from Des Moines will travel to Omaha. That's a short trip. But also because pretty much every Iowa State fan that's there is going to be cheering for Drake to win in that first round.
Oh,
because an Iowa State Drake showdown in the NCAA tournament would be pretty epic.
I remember seeing a tweet from Iowa Chill. It's like petition to shut down the state if Drake and Iowa State win their first round matchups.
I mean I would say we need to take the day off of work. Only that'll be a Saturday.
I was going to
so
say
we'd
it's
already
just a
be off
Saturday.
work, but yeah.
The bars are going to be packed if that's the case.
Oh yes.
You'd have to get there early.
The bars everywhere except Iowa City.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There, we all just travel to Iowa City for the.
Yeah, there you go. BYU's an interesting path I've got here because I've got Morehead State knocking off Illinois. So I got BYU. I got BYU beating Duquesne, Duquesne has no business in this tournament. They just happened to win the A10, kind of by accident.
But Morehead, really?
See, I said,
Upsets happen.
Not just that, but I said that I'd have two teams from the Big Ten advancing to the second round. I said one was going to be Purdue, and one was either going to be Illinois or Nebraska.
And
it was Nebraska.
All right,
I'm sticking to my word on that. I don't think Texas A&M is all that good, and from what I have seen of Nebraska this year, I have liked what I've seen. They're one of the more consistent teams from the Big Ten. They're reliable. Illinois has almost no defense whatsoever. They've just relied on an extremely potent offense, and defense travels a lot better than offense does. So I think that makes Illinois a little bit ripe for an upset. So I've got Morehead beating them, so that gives BYU a really easy path to the Sweet 16, where I have Iowa State beating them.
I've got Iowa State beating...
and that's a matchup that scares me.
I've got Iowa State beating Illinois in the Sweet 16.
So do I.
Because of all of the matchups that I have Iowa State in on here, I do have I have Iowa State losing to Houston
in the
final,
in the championship. Wow.
But across the other games that I have Iowa State in on here, South Dakota State we all got Drake, Auburn, and Baylor. I'd be more scared of BYU than any of the other teams that Iowa State would play in my bracket, aside from Houston, who I actually have us losing to. And I don't think anybody's going to beat Houston. It doesn't really matter how this bracket goes. I don't think they're going to lose. So that's what I've got. Any other big talking point? Michigan State has no business being in the tournament. We can all agree on that. A lot of bid stealers this year. We've pretty much all heard that. There's some narrative around Colgate potentially being an upset over Baylor. I think that one's so talked about that Baylor's going to go into that game ready, and it's not going to happen. And as I previously mentioned, I have Baylor running all the way to the Final Four. Arizona is kind of a Purdue-like team where they're decent, but they choke it. I've got Arizona losing to Dayton in the second round. Any major discrepancies there?
I have Arizona in the championship.
Well, I know my bracket's better than yours.
Yeah.
Oh, and you have Purdue, so yeah, I guess I
have
beat
Purdue,
both
North
of you.
Carolina.
Well, I beat both of y'all. Yep. That's
I got Arizona winning it all. No, I'm just kidding.
Who do you have winning it all again?
I have Marquette winning it all.
Marquette?
You're patently insane.
Yeah, I was gonna say the exact same thing.
Tyler Kolek is not gonna carry them all the way to a natty by himself. Shaka Smart's a good coach. Like, Shaka Smart took VCU all the way to the Final Four way back when, but Marquette is not that good. Yeah. I don't see any other major talking points that I want to get to here. You guys got anything that sticks out to you guys yet that we haven't talked about?
I'm just really excited because the next 3 weeks are just nothing but basketball.
Well, at least the weekends anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays are a little bit rough. But
just wait till we get into the actual fun playoffs, which are NHL. 3 games a night.
That's going to be beautiful when we finally get to it.
Mm-hmm.
You got NHL and NBAs going on at the same time too. That's some heavy playoff action too. Another wonderful time of the year.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we're running up on time limit here.
Will St. Peter's beat Tennessee?
No.
St. Peter's, come on.
Too much attention to that game. Anyway, follow the Cornfield Sports Pod on Twitter at CSportsPod. Blake, where can they find you at?
They can find me at Blake Attack 1846.
Vinny?
You can find me at Vinacious D23. Think about Tenacious D. Just replace the 10 with Vin, and then D, and then 23.
All right, and then you can find me. I had a handle change on Twitter. It's SFISU Matt. Tap the follow button on Spotify, the plus button on Apple, subscribe on YouTube, Rumble.
This is Blake Peterson.
And I'm Vinny Cataldo.
I'm Matt Menson, and this has been a bonus episode of the Cornfield Sports Pod.